What if your deepest wound was also your greatest gift? This isn't just poetic. It's the heartbeat of the wounded healer myth that spans from ancient Greece to modern psychology. From Chiron's immortal pain to Jung's psychological insights, this journey reveals a powerful truth. Real healing doesn't come from escaping pain, but from walking through it. In this exploration, we'll uncover how suffering becomes sacred, how brokenness opens the door to wisdom, and why your scars might just be the beginning of your transformation. To truly become a healer, you must first experience being hurt. But simply going through pain isn't enough. Many people suffer deeply and still never become healers. What sets a true healer apart is their ability to face and move through their suffering, to transform it rather than stay stuck in it. Healing comes from the strength and wisdom gained on the other side of that pain. Everyone's path through suffering is different, which is why understanding the personal meaning behind your wounds is also a search for the deeper meaning of your life. The wounded healer is a timeless symbol that speaks to something essential in all genuine healing. It lives at the core of true transformation. Carl Jung is often credited with the idea of the wounded healer, though he actually used the phrase wounded physician. He believed that real healing doesn't come from the doctor or therapist, but from deep within the patient's own soul. The goal isn't to fix someone, but to support their own journey toward wholeness, what Jung called individuation. In this sense, healing isn't something imposed from the outside. It grows from within. And that growth begins when we stop running from our pain and start facing it. As long as we blame the world or avoid our wounds, we stay trapped in what Jung called neurotic suffering. It's only when we face our pain honestly that we move toward what he called meaningful suffering, the kind that transforms. In Greek mythology, Apollo was known as a radiant god of healing and light, but also as a bringer of disease with his arrows. He raised Chiron, a centaur who was wise, kind, and unlike his wild, drunken kin. Chiron became a master healer, but fate dealt him a cruel hand. He was wounded by a poisoned arrow, and despite all his skill, couldn't heal his own injury. That lifelong pain made him a legendary healer, not in spite of his suffering, but because of it. The irony is powerful. The wound that tormented him held the very essence of his healing gift. The pain didn't just break him, it refined him. He even gave up his immortality to save Prometheus, who had given fire, symbolizing human consciousness, to mankind. This sacrifice made Chiron a symbol of noble suffering, and the gods honored him by placing him among the stars as the constellation Centaurus. Chiron's story reminds us that our deepest pain can also be the root of our deepest purpose. His wound never fully healed, but through it, he gained the power to help others heal. In a way, that's what makes a true healer. Someone who's learned to live with the wound and who transforms that pain into wisdom and service. Christ mirrors this same theme. The difference is that while Chiron had no choice, Christ chose to suffer. He could have walked away, but didn't. Both Chiron and Christ endure great suffering. Both offer healing to others, and both ascend in the end. Their stories blend the healthy and the wounded, the light and the dark. That mix is key. It's what makes healing real. St. Paul also spoke of a thorn in his flesh, a symbol of suffering that wouldn't go away. It's a reminder that pain isn't always something to get rid of. Sometimes it's something to carry and grow from. Chiron passed his healing wisdom to Asclepius, the son of Apollo, and a mortal woman named Coronis. When Coronis cheated on Apollo while pregnant, she was killed. But as her body burned on the pyre, Apollo saved the unborn child by cutting him from her womb. Asclepius grew up to become the god of healing and carried a staff with a snake wrapped around it, the rod of Asclepius, a symbol of medicine that we still use today. It's often confused with the caduceus, the double snake staff of Hermes, which actually represents commerce, not healing. This whole mythic lineage, from Apollo to Chiron to Asclepius, shows us that healing often begins in darkness. Pain can crush you, or it can awaken something sacred inside. The wounded healer isn't just someone who's hurt. It's someone who learns to sit with their suffering, find the spark of light within it, and bring that light to others. That's the gift. That's the magic. The earth had become too full of people, and Hades, the god who ruled the underworld, wasn't happy about it. He complained to his brother Zeus, who was furious at Asclepius for stepping over a sacred line. In the eyes of the gods, humans were meant to be mortal. Only the gods were supposed to live forever. To punish Asclepius for bringing people back from the dead, Zeus struck him down with a thunderbolt and sent him to the underworld. Even though Asclepius was a god, he was forced to experience death just like a mortal. Later, however, he was brought back to life and welcomed to Mount Olympus, home of the gods. That made Asclepius the only god who ever died and came back, and it earned him a special place in the hearts of the Greeks. They admired him deeply and worshipped him as a unique figure, divine yet touched by human fate. In ancient Greece, temples known as Asclepia were dedicated to him. These sacred healing centers were believed to cure both the body and the soul. One of the most famous was in Epidaurus, which became the most celebrated healing sanctuary of the classical world. Pilgrims came from far and wide to undergo purification rituals, special diets, baths, and spiritual cleansing. These practices were closely tied to Hygeia, Asclepius's daughter, who was the goddess of health and hygiene. Her name is where we get the word hygiene. The healers in these temples were known as therapeutai, a Greek term that originally meant someone who served the gods, but came to mean someone who helped others heal. It's the root of the word therapist today. After days of preparation, a patient would be led into a small stone chamber to sleep, watched only by a guard. This process wasn't about discussing theology. It was about cooperating with the divine through direct experience. The goal was to have a theophany, a personal encounter with the divine. Many dreamers reported seeing Asclepius in human form, applying ointment to their wounds, or appearing as a snake or dog, both sacred symbols. Dogs were seen as guardians of the underworld, like Cerberus, the three-headed hound who watched over Hades. Snakes, which moved freely through the temple chambers, were revered as creatures of wisdom, healing, and rebirth. The non-venomous snakes used in these rituals became known as Asclepian snakes, named in his honor. Their presence symbolized the mystery of death and renewal. Dreams were central to the healing process. At Epidaurus, healing didn't come through prophecy like at Delphi. It came through the dream itself. If you dreamed of Asclepius, that vision was seen as the cure. Later on, patients would report their dreams to a therapeutic, who might suggest a visit to the bathhouse, physical activity in the gymnasium, or other treatments. In many ways, this was the earliest form of psychotherapy. The healing process ended with two rituals. First, a song of praise, called a paean, to thank the god, and second, a sacrifice of a rooster. This offering symbolized the victory of light over darkness, of health over illness. The success of these practices is recorded in many ancient writings, where patients detailed their recoveries and credited the god. Even Socrates referred to Asclepius in his final moments. Just before drinking poison, he told his friend, "Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Don't forget to pay the debt." In that cryptic message, Socrates seemed to say that death had cured him of life's suffering. For him, death wasn't an end, it was a healing. Asclepius, the god who once died, offers not immortality, but time. Time to heal, to grow, and to prepare for what comes next. He reminds us that healing isn't about escaping death, it's about being ready when it comes. On his massive statue, a golden crown shimmered around his head, representing rays of the sun. This light, this solar heritage, was not just symbolic. It pointed to the unique power passed down through generations of Asclepiads, the true physicians. Their knowledge didn't come from religion or philosophy, but from deep, lived understanding of illness and recovery. It was a gift, not just of knowledge, but of compassion, born from experience. It all begins with a small spark, an intuitive glimpse that rising from deep pain is possible. With observation, practice, and real effort, that tiny spark can grow into a powerful ability, both an art and a science, of true healing. Illness and healing aren't total opposites. They're two sides of the same coin, playing off each other to reveal something much deeper. The sun-like healer represents this inner power, showing us that just like the sun shines from within itself, real healing begins inside us too. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that a natural death isn't something to be mourned, but something worth honoring. In his words, many people die too late and some too early, but to die at the right time, that's the idea. He suggests that if you've never truly lived, you probably won't know how to die well either. For Nietzsche, dying at the right time should be a kind of celebration, even a sacred festival. He paints a picture of a fulfilling death as one surrounded by those who still believe in life, full of hope and meaning. He believed that we need to learn how to die as much as we need to learn how to live, and that death should come with a vow to the living, a promise carried on. In ancient Greek thinking, old age wasn't just a final life stage. It was a transition, a bridge between life and death. Carl Jung echoed this, seeing aging as a vital psychological phase, just as meaningful as being born. To deny death, he argued, only leads to deeper psychological suffering. Death is unavoidable, and resisting it means resisting life. Just as young people must learn how to live, the elderly need to come to terms with their own mortality. And to do that, they must have a personal myth, a story they shape by listening to their dreams, paying attention to intuition, and noticing life's meaningful coincidences. Jung once wrote that myth can offer valuable images to someone nearing the end of life, symbols that help make sense of what's next. Whether a person truly believes in these symbols isn't the point. What matters is that someone who puts faith in life's deeper meaning walks toward death with more peace than someone who feels lost or hopeless. One marches toward nothing, the other moves in step with life itself. Jung's whole approach to psychology is built around the idea that we carry opposing forces inside us. It's the tension between those opposites that brings about real personal growth. This concept, called enantiodromia, shows that finding the self means reconciling those inner contradictions. Our lives have two halves. The first half focuses on the outside world, building careers, families, and identities. But in the second half, our focus turns inward. This inward shift is when the journey of individuation begins, the slow, conscious process of connecting with our deepest self. Often, this journey kicks off with some kind of emotional wound, a deep suffering that shakes the foundation of who we think we are. This pain isn't just random, it's a call. Though we don't always recognize it, this call pushes us toward growth. We need to stop chasing the illusion of a perfect life without pain or loss. That fantasy is, in many ways, the worst illness of all. People called to a healing path often go through serious suffering themselves. The stories of Chiron, Asclepius, and Christ all show this. It's almost inevitable. If you choose to be a healer, you'll be wounded too. Becoming whole through individuation is a painful journey. It's like carrying your own cross, just as Christ did on the road to his crucifixion. That wound becomes your invitation, a sign that your journey is starting. It marks the beginning of the classic hero's path. The hero's task is to face and overcome the darkness. This battle is more than symbolic. It's the struggle between consciousness and the forces of the unconscious. When the hero defeats the monster, he wins something priceless, a treasure, a healing potion, or even love. These treasures are metaphors for your true feelings and untapped potential. Jung put it this way: the real hero isn't the one who avoids the dragon, but the one who dares to face it and wins. The person who has fought that battle and survived gains something deep: self-confidence rooted in truth. He earns the right to believe he can face whatever comes next. Joseph Campbell took these ideas further in his famous concept of the hero's journey. It's not just a story structure. It's a profound myth that speaks to what it means to be human. Every challenge we face, every wound we suffer, becomes part of our mythic journey, guiding us toward who we really are. The call to adventure begins when we're pulled away from our familiar world, our comfort zone, and thrown into unfamiliar and often frightening territory. That shift usually stirs up a lot of fear, and in many cases, we resist it. But ignoring that call can slowly eat away at us, damaging both our lives and our relationships. Eventually, the pain builds up to a point where we can't ignore it anymore. That's when we're forced to face our wounds. Going through this process feels like a death. The old version of who we were has to die so that a new, stronger version of ourselves can be born. In The Sacred and the Profane, religious historian Mircea Eliade talks about two ways people have experienced life throughout history: the sacred and the profane. From a spiritual viewpoint, the sacred, what he calls hierophany, brings order and meaning to the world. It's kind of like the world of ideals in Plato's philosophy: timeless, universal, unchanging. The sacred represents the eternal and the divine. The profane, on the other hand, is the everyday world: temporary, ordinary, and filled with change, decay, and death. Eliade uses the word archetype a bit differently from Carl Jung. For Eliade, archetypes are sacred patterns that people access through rituals, imitation, and symbolic acts. When people take part in religious behavior, they aren't just remembering holy events, they're reliving them, tapping into that ancient sacred energy. Our ancestors knew that without a connection to the sacred, life felt meaningless, just dust and ashes. But the sacred wasn't only comforting, it could also be terrifying. Eliade refers to this feeling as mysterium tremendum, the overwhelming awe of the divine, and mysterium fascinans, the deep, irresistible pull toward it. These intense feelings come from direct encounters with the divine, known as numinous experiences. Even when someone chooses to live a non-religious, modern life, they can never fully erase these ancient instincts. Rituals and celebrations still echo humanity's desire to return to a mythical time, what Eliade calls the eternal return. It's like a spiritual time loop, where we can briefly step out of the everyday and into the divine. Every year, these rituals repeat and bring us back to the origins of existence, making sacred time feel alive again. This cyclical view of time, where time loops back rather than marches forward, challenges the modern mindset of straight-line progress. According to Eliade, that obsession with historical progress, or what he called the terror of history, is a major source of anxiety for people today. Eliade also believed that sickness, dreams, and ecstatic states are forms of shamanic initiation. These crises aren't signs of illness, but rather moments of deep transformation. Shamanism isn't a mental disorder, it's a human response to spiritual crisis. Shamans often experience illness or extreme psychological distress as part of their journey. Healing comes when they perform rituals, like drumming or chanting, that realign them with the sacred. Afterward, they're seen as healers in their communities. A true shaman is someone who has been sick but has found a way to heal. Their ability to guide others comes from their own transformation. The intense emotional and spiritual experiences they go through, often in states of trance, reveal powerful symbols from the psyche. These symbols speak to broader human truths, and by expressing them creatively, shamans help others understand their own inner lives. Shamanism may be one of the oldest spiritual paths in human history, older even than the first civilizations. Despite differences in culture, shamans across the world share similar experiences, entering alternate states of consciousness, receiving visions, and connecting with deeper realities. These transformations often begin with some kind of inner collapse or crisis, what feels like a psychological or spiritual death. Interestingly, this mirrors what many people go through in therapy. Lots of folks are drawn to healing professions because they're trying to work through their own emotional wounds, whether from childhood trauma, low self-esteem, or feelings of inadequacy. By helping others, they hope to help themselves too. In psychology, we often talk about compensation, how people unconsciously cover up insecurities. For example, someone who feels unworthy might act overly confident. A person who doubts their intelligence might dive into books, absorbing knowledge to feel better about themselves, and they often go out of their way to show it. These feelings of inferiority live in the shadow part of the psyche. Meanwhile, the persona is the mask we wear in public, a kind of cover-up for what we're hiding inside. Understanding this dynamic between our outer mask and inner wounds is key to real healing. When someone overcompensates, they often behave in ways that completely contradict how they actually feel. In doing so, they hide their true selves behind a mask. Their problems don't go away, they just get buried, never properly dealt with, and over time, their inner shadow grows deeper and darker. A painful or abusive childhood can lead to what Freud called repetition compulsion, where a person unconsciously relives traumatic patterns over and over again in different relationships, whether with parents, friends, partners, or even their own children. Each time the cycle repeats, the pain becomes more tangled, more confusing. But our unconscious doesn't do this to punish us. It's actually trying to heal us. It recreates familiar pain, so we might eventually recognize the pattern, confront it, and form a new relationship with it. In this sense, what hurts us may also hold the key to our healing. The Greeks captured this idea in the word pharmakon, meaning a substance that can act as both a poison and a cure. A wounded healer is someone who takes their pain seriously, works through it, and eventually turns that poison into medicine, not just for themselves, but for others too. This concept plays a major role in therapy. Jung once said that a big part of any deep psychological treatment comes from the therapist doing their own inner work. You can only help someone through something if you've made peace with it in yourself. If a patient triggers an unresolved wound in the therapist, that pain can actually become part of the healing process, as long as the therapist is aware of it and handles it constructively. That's the heart of the ancient Greek idea of the wounded physician. Both Freud and Jung were modern examples of this. Freud suffered terribly for the last 16 years of his life from jaw cancer, and yet continued his work. Jung, during a critical period in his life, came close to suicide while facing his own unconscious. Near the end of his life, too weak to walk, he was driven around the countryside he loved, silently saying goodbye. But even in suffering, both men kept writing, kept practicing, turning their personal pain into something valuable, much like alchemists transforming lead into gold. That said, healing in therapy isn't something the therapist gives to the patient. Patients often project the image of a savior onto their therapist, especially when they're desperate for change. When progress stalls, they might lash out or even walk away. This back-and-forth dynamic is called transference, and it's a normal part of the therapeutic process. A patient might unconsciously direct feelings from their past, like anger at an abusive father, onto the therapist. At the same time, the therapist must avoid countertransference, where the patient starts to remind them of someone from their own life. If that happens, and the therapist isn't careful, they risk projecting their own unhealed wounds onto the person they're trying to help. That's why it's essential for therapists to have a clear understanding of their own history, their wounds, their vulnerabilities, and how they've dealt with them. Our deepest pain can be the very thing that allows us to connect with and help others. The most powerful healers are those who've truly been through it. Jung believed that a therapist could only help a patient reach places they themselves had already been. It's not just about being kind or empathetic. It's about knowing, from personal experience, what that inner work looks and feels like. Eventually, the patient also needs to realize that real healing doesn't come from someone else. It comes from within. The therapist may serve as a guide, almost like a spiritual mentor or psychopomp. But the hard part, slaying the dragon of personal pain, has to be done by the patient themselves. Jung described therapy as a genuine conversation between two people, face to face, human to human. Both have something to say. The therapist has knowledge and insight, yes, but the patient brings their own truth to the table. And sometimes, the therapist's own shadow can get stirred up, especially when working with someone who shares a similar kind of wound. Interestingly, the patient's shadow, everything they've buried or denied, also holds their inner healer. That's why the hidden emotional bond between therapist and patient is just as important as what's said out loud. The healing process doesn't just transform the patient, it can change the therapist too. But that kind of transformation only happens when the therapist stays connected to their own unconscious. Without that connection, they risk becoming too identified with the healer role and losing touch with their own humanity. One common trap for therapists is falling into what's known as the Asclepius complex, named after the Greek god who went too far by raising the dead. In this mindset, the therapist starts to believe they possess godlike powers to heal and no longer see the importance of forming a real, personal connection with the patient. They begin to over-identify with the role of the savior. Jung once had a dream where his patient appeared as a towering giant, and he himself was very small. Since dreams often reflect inner dynamics, Jung realized that he'd unconsciously been seeing himself as superior, looking down on the patient. Once he adjusted his attitude and approached the patient with more humility, the therapeutic relationship improved dramatically. Jung regularly reminded his students to stay vigilant, always monitoring their own reactions, being mindful not to project their unresolved wounds onto their already vulnerable patients. Practicing depth psychology can be risky. The therapist is constantly exposed to others' pain and is always at risk of reactivating their own. But Jung didn't see emotional conflict or suffering as simply a disorder. It was also a kind of initiation, a rite of passage that leads us deeper into the unconscious. The wounded healer archetype becomes active when we are hurt. Just as physical injuries require cleaning, bandaging, and time to heal, emotional wounds also need a safe, nurturing environment, removal of harmful influences, and patience to let natural inner forces do the healing. The experience of being wounded sets us on a quest to discover who we really are. It's a sacred moment. As Leonard Cohen put it, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Our brokenness isn't the end of the story. It's the opening to something greater. The fractured self becomes a doorway into the archetypal realm, where we connect to the deep patterns and guiding wisdom of the self. Ironically, the breaking down of our identity, while it may feel like the loss of wholeness, is actually a hidden expression of it. Something has to be torn down for something new and more authentic to be born. In this sense, suffering isn't just personal. It's part of something bigger. It can signal that we're not only wrestling with our own issues, but with the collective psyche, the emotional state of the entire era. What we experience inside mirrors what's going on in the world, and the reverse is also true. When we grow and heal, we contribute to healing the world. And as we help improve the world around us, we change internally too. We are all interconnected pieces of a much larger, sacred whole. Realizing this is what expands our consciousness. The wounded healer archetype teaches us that it's possible to hold two truths at once, that we can be deeply wounded and deeply whole at the same time. That's the kind of awareness that leads to true maturity. The biggest, most meaningful problems in life aren't things we fix like broken machines. They can't be solved in the usual sense. Instead, we grow past them, we evolve beyond them. And that growth begins right where we break.